Want to welcome everybody to our Cru Houston Leader Impact virtual presentation. Kyle has over 50 years of experience in refining, midstream, E&P, and energy services and trading. So quite a wide range there. He started out with Exxon and then later went to Koch Industries, where he was for a number of years before becoming Senior Vice President in 1995. And then he served as CEO of Entergy Koch. After his retirement from there, he's been on a number of boards, including as an executive advisor to CCMP Capital Advisors. And Bill, he is currently the chairman of the board of Shermco and Hepco, which are both Griffin investment companies. He has over 40 years of experience in the energy and 25 years of executive leadership experience. So we're going to have some expert advice and perspectives on this. And so to kind of get started, I think when we're talking about servant leadership, it's good to define terms. And so Bill or Kyle, whoever wants to lead off, would you like to define it and help people understand what servant leadership is?
Because many organizations are really kind of one of two general types. One of them is what you call a hierarchical top-down type approach, whereas a servant leadership model tends to flip that upside down. So that's from a structural standpoint, that's one of the ways they look. The key thing for a servant leader led type organization is it focuses first on the customer, and then it organizes itself in a way and hires the kind of people that ultimately will let it most effectively serve those customers in a way that's profitable for the company and also leads to great customer satisfaction. So that's at a 50,000 foot, that's kind of the key thing. From a Christ-centered teaching standpoint, those of us that are followers of Christ, this model of the servant leader model fits beautifully into the way that we were certainly taught by Jesus and what he does. And so the key for a servant leader is that it's not only about performance, but it's about loving. It's about your people, your company, your customers, and then treating them as you would want to be treated. At the same time, being profitable for the company. So that's at a very broad level. What I would point out is the one on the right, the upside down hierarchy, is actually a Home Depot model, which is one of the most successful companies in the world. And I would have to say probably very much also fits Chick-fil-A, but it was started by Home Depot, where the way they look at it is the leader is there to serve his people, who serve the employees, who serve the customer. So that's really kind of the model. Bill and I both were kind of raised for many years at Koch Industries, although it didn't have exactly this upside down model. I would also say that any successful company has to have at least 5 dimensions that the leader has to make sure is in place. One is common vision. Another thing is that you would be called values or culture. You have to really make sure that the people in your company also have shared values, the right values and shared values. The third thing is everybody has to know what their decision rights are, what they can do and can't do, and so that there's order. That's another part that a leader takes place in. And the other thing is incentives. People have to make sure that our incentives are aligned not only with the customer, but with the company and with other things within the company. And then last is you have to have robust knowledge sharing to make sure that if there's trust among all people, then the knowledge, whatever you learn about the customer, gets quickly passed on down through the organization so that you can be innovative and all that. So those are that's at 50,000 feet. That's the difference between what I would call a servant leader model in a company versus a traditional hierarchical model.
Yeah, Kyle, I would agree. I mean, so I think we're on the same page. The other thing I would say is it's got a lot to do with how you do things as a leader and the approach and mentality that you take. I think a lot of people think it's maybe a soft leadership style. It's not necessarily soft.
Right.
You care about people, but it's really a balance of providing the guidance and leadership required, whether that's vision, priorities, objectives, but then really care enough about the people and the customers to act in a service-minded manner. And probably, if I had to pick a couple things that I would say is the most important it's not about you as the leader. And we've all worked for people who it's about them. This requires, it takes a lot of humility, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time to develop. And I think you develop it as you go throughout your career. At least I did. And I kind of switched models during my career, and I learned a lot from you as you and I worked together at Coke, and that really started to change my mindset.
There are some mischaracterizations that servant leadership can have that people might jump to some conclusions that aren't accurate, or what have you found to be trouble spots?
Bill hit on one, and I think that the thought of servant leadership comes across to some people as soft. Like, hey, they want a General Patton or a Donald Trump type model. We're going to take the hill or whatever. There's times that probably is called for, but Bill said it best. It's not soft, because many times the leader has to deal with really difficult issues, all the way from discipline to termination. But you can still do that in a way that's loving. And I think that's what Bill said. It's how you deal with these issues. Just because you're a servant leader doesn't mean you don't make tough decisions, because a lot of times you have to make very tough decisions. The other thing he pointed out, it's not instant pudding. It's really about perseverance. And sometimes you have to persevere through some really tough times. I'm sure in a minute, Bill and I will share some things we went through, and it's you really get tested when you're on the carpet.
Yeah, that's right, Kyle. And I think, accountability is a requirement in any organization. And I can remember over my career when we're trying to develop people, and you would hold them accountable, and they would get confused, with the servant leader approach and thinking, you're supposed to be helping me. And sometimes helping people, means holding them accountable. And of course, you owe it to them to make sure they understand what's expected, as Kyle mentioned in the intro, clear roles and responsibilities. But that's a big part of it, because you typically don't achieve objectives without that agreement.
And it's interesting. I didn't have to do this very often, thank goodness, but nobody likes to be involved where you're letting somebody go. But you can actually help them there also to see that it's really not about them personally. It's just that it's not a fit or whatever. And then you do what you can to help them really get placed somewhere else. So I still have good relationships with people that are no longer working with the companies I work for. And so I want to say that I consider that as important as anything else. I want to take care of the individual, even though I'm protecting the company.
Yeah, it goes to showing care and respect for people, regardless of title, regardless of the situation. And just a little story. I worked for a guy who was pretty tough on getting rid of people. So he would pack up he'd have them pack up their desk. We were on a trading floor, and if they made a mistake or hadn't been performing well, and I watched Kyle when I was with him at Coke, and it really stood out to me the way he handled things like that. And Kyle would be very firm, but very fair in terms of how he dealt with that. And like I said, you evolve as a leader. And we used to call him Dr. Love, because he would show the love to the folks, even in the most difficult situations. But that really set an example for me on, what's the best way to deal with people, and how do you really ultimately get people to follow you? They need to know that you care and that you're fair.
So who or what really inspired you to become a servant leader?
For me, it's funny, as I thought it through. I became a Christian at age 42, so I'd already been well into my career when I became a Christian, and or I'll just say a follower of Christ, which is more apropos than a Christian. And I was really worried at what, because Coke was a very entrepreneurial company, and I was really wondering, who am I now? Suddenly, how do I fit? Does everything? So that I went through that transition. So I was obviously discipled by a great gentleman, but there's a gentleman named Lorne Sanny, who I went to a retreat very shortly after becoming a believer. He was the head of navigators. And I still got this little card with me that but we spent a whole weekend on leadership, and it was I'm just going to mention this real quick because I think it's apropos. He was using David as the model for a servant leader. And it was from Psalm 78, 72. It says, "So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands." So we really dug into that deep. But here was his best, this is one of the best definitions of leadership I've learned. He says, "Leaders bring vision, faith, and courage to coordinated effort." So that was the first time I really started putting together a model of what it means to be a servant leader. And at the same time, when I was at Coke, we were going through this whole deal of building up market-based management and trying to figure out how do you set up a company. And so that was, I would have to say, those were the two significant things in my life that helped me really understand what leadership was and how to move forward. And then I observed that in other people that Bill and I both know, like Sterling Varner, who was the president of Coke, and Joe Moeller, who I worked for many years.
Dennis, mine's similar. I mean, I actually became a true believer in Christ in my 40s. It really happened through a situation where went through some really tough times at work. I would have to say generally up to that point, I'd been pretty successful in my career. I was a pretty hard driver. Probably not what you would call a servant leader. And it was kind of a reset moment for me. And at the time I was working with Kyle, and in fact, I almost left the company at one point, and the way Kyle treated me during that period had an impact on me. And maybe Kyle, I'll let you tell that story a little bit, but kind of what we went through as we dealt with that. But that's really when I decided to make a change. And again, I worked with a few people who really were pretty harsh and authoritative, and they got results, but maybe not necessarily sustainable results.
Yeah, we were building the trading business. This is back around what we built, 95, 96?
95, 96, yeah.
And, Enron and Dynegy and everybody was going nuts. And we were building our trading capability and power and gas trading. And we still were in Wichita. I think, Bill, you were still in Houston.
That's right. That's right.
And nobody wanted to go to Wichita. So we had all this talent, and we weren't building a lot of assets like others. So long story short, suddenly we were getting raided by Enron and Dynegy, and then Shell went after Bill and two of our other key people. And it would have really, Bill was kind of leading our power trading. And all I remembered, Bill and I had gotten to know each other at that point pretty well, but I went to Mr. Coke and said, "Look, I'd really like to bring these gentlemen in here and let's talk about how important they are and how we believe in them." I can't remember. Did two others? One of them left for sure.
One did leave. Yeah, one did leave.
Anyway,
the other two stayed.
And but Bill came in, and the point was, I just told him how much we believed in him, and I thought we really had a chance if we could stay together that we could do something. But I wasn't going to stand in his way, and I was actually. What I think a leader does sometimes you have to turn off the company button so you can just sit there and talk person to person, because you care for them as an individual. And that was, I think, the discussion that was probably more important than the company.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That you cared enough to understand the situation and appreciate it. And in a lot of cases, folks would just kick you out the door or get mad at you. But you could see that Kyle cared. And the funny thing is, Kyle talked to me, and he had asked me what are they offering you? And I had shared it with him, and he said, "Well, look, I'll match that or do better." And I said, "Kyle, that's okay. I'm going to stay." And it turned out to be a great decision. But that was kind of a key point in terms of starting to see that caring side of leadership and really serving people as opposed to just serving your own ego or kind of making very quick decisions.
So what have been the career benefits as you look back over your career of that? And you kind of touched on some of that, but are there any other stories or situations that you'd like to share concerning that as far as career building?
I would say, one of the biggest benefits is the relationships that you carry along the way. I have people that worked with years ago that that really appreciated that approach and kind of went through some of the struggles together. And, that to me is probably the most satisfying part of it. I can't say, when you say direct benefits, very fortunate in my career, got to do a lot of things. But I do think leaders with that perspective, that mindset, do tend to do well over time, because people are willing to follow you and do things, kind of together. Yeah. And so, I do think that helps you throughout your career, as opposed to somebody maybe who has a more authoritative type approach and more of a selfish approach. Sometimes they get, maybe they're out there by themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll just say, I really think this is the right model because it's good business too. And good business means it's, I think, the most profitable way to go. So I do think there's monetary backing for this. But back to Bill's point, I think the most important things I take away have really been the relationships that I've built, like with Bill. I mean, we've stayed close friends for a long, long time. I'm a team guy. And it's kind of like when I think back on my life, I think about a certain teacher or a coach or whatever that meant a lot to me. That's what I get more thrilled by. The benefit of Dennis is, hearing a call from somebody I haven't talked to in a long time, and we'll sit down and talk about the wars we went through, because we went through a lot of wars together. So it's the shared experiences. I think it's Bill mentioned it, but if you're really a servant leader, he doesn't play the blame game. He's a team player, and if the team screws up, and he's right in there with them. And so I think that's really important too. I think as much as anything, though, I'll just say there's peace of mind that the leader can have, knowing that they did everything they could and tried to follow Christ in everything they did in this life. And even if it ends up not well, I have peace of mind about the way I manage things.
Yeah, you can look yourself in the mirror, right, and say you try to do the very best you could. And
you could, I guess, a person could not win that game either, but I think you have to look yourself in the mirror every day and say that I did the best I could, and I didn't cut corners.
Are there some war stories you'd like to share that would be apropos here?
But yeah, so maybe, Kyle, we should talk about. I'm trying to think.
My biggest mistake ever. I was a golden boy, a rocket star, and all of a sudden we made this major acquisition. And I mean, literally 3 months after we might make it, it's a midstream business. Yeah. The Asian currency crisis hit, and margins went from record highs to negative. So it was not a lot of fun.
It was interesting, and to put it in even more context, it was at the time that Mr. Koch was decided to be a little more aggressive. Kind of Enron was blowing and going, and he wanted to grow the company. And I think, we kind of ended up maybe paying a little bit more than we did, and we were kind of in a rush to do it. As we went through it, due diligence maybe wasn't the best that it should have been, and we discovered some things that were a surprise, or from a strategy perspective, and things like that. But I'll never forget. Kyle and I were kind of arm in arm working through it, and we had a meeting with David Koch. He told us, guys, this is the worst acquisition in the history of Koch Industries. And you can imagine the impression that had, on me, yeah. But especially Kyle, because Kyle, was obviously senior in the company. But I'll never forget Kyle talking to the employees, and I'll let you share what you talked about. But even through all of that, Kyle still had a servant's heart and didn't give up. And we had a employee meeting, and we were going through some of the results of the acquisition, and he shared with the team a quote from Romans.
Well, it's one you hate to quote because that means you're in the pot, but it's Romans 5:3-5, because we rejoice in our suffering. We know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope, and hope does not disappoint. That was kind of the way
That's right.
I was leading through it. I said, guys, we got to get through this. We got to persevere. And anyway, it's funny. Bill remembers that vividly.
I do. That, it was encouraging to the team because you're not giving up, right? And the leaders up there saying, hey, it's tough, acknowledge it's tough, but we're not giving up.
It was the hardest part of my life I've ever gone through business wise, even to the point I thought, well, maybe God was calling me out of business into ministry. And the funny thing was, a lot of people were worried about me at the time because it was really hard. It's one thing to lose your own money, but when you feel like you disappointed your team and Mr. Koch and all that was much more difficult for me. Yeah. But the interesting thing was, I'll have to give you the happy ending to this. So I basically had even offered to resign. And I don't know how many people know that. And they said, look, no, just my buddy, Joe Moeller, just said, look, Kyle, look, you just need to get your mojo back and we still trust you and love you and all that. So that was a servant leader to me. And so I was going to actually retire early. And we were at the time getting ready. We were trying to recover from this since we put together this Entergy Coke deal. So I'd kind of initiated that and I was working with Entergy and we were about ready to get the deal done when I said that I was really thinking about retiring. So I pretty much was going to be out of the picture. And so the team, I'll never forget, we were meeting with Mr. Koch and we had all of our team there. And at this point, they know I'm retiring. And so we're going over the deal and Charles says, this deal looks really good to me. Is there anything that we're not seeing here is there anything that could take this off the rails? And I'll never forget a guy named David Sabatka that Bill knows real well, headed of our trailing company. He said, well, if nobody's going to say it, I need to say it. He said, they were going to do some kind of a quasi leadership role, dual role to the board and all that, because there was no CEO. And they said, David said, I just don't think this is going to work. We need a CEO that understands this business and can make this happen. Charles says, I agree with that. Do you have any suggestions? And I was at the end of the table with Joe. I'll never forget, the whole table looks my way. And it was actually one of the most encouraging things in my life, because after beating myself up for 2 years because of this other bad deal, I could see they still wanted me and trusted me to run it. And so later we got Entergy Coke, and then of course the rest is history. That turned out to be probably one of the better deals we ever did at Coke. So we made up for David Koch's concern about the other deal. So that's the way it ended up. But it all really got back, I think, even for me, there was a servant leadership role of Joe Moeller and others that really cared about me and wanted me to stay in there. So, by the way, what I heard from God at the time too is, Kyle, you're already on full-time mission for me. You don't need to quit. You need to clean up this mess. There'll be another time to go out, retire, but it's not now. So that's the war story I remember the most. And Bill and Bill came in and was terrific in helping clean up a really messy situation. He was probably wishing he was back. He'd gone to Shell after I put him in that job.
It's funny you say that, because I can remember going through it at the time, and we've all been there, right? I can remember having to report up on what the results of the business were, and Charles was tough. I mean, you talk about accountability. He held you accountable. But I can remember going through that and thinking, boy, how did I get into this? And but as I look back on it, it's just a lesson for everybody from a leadership perspective. I learned more in that couple of years than I learned in all the other years when things were going great. Yeah. And I think, sometimes you lose perspective when you are down and things are difficult. And you will learn more and develop more in that period. You may not think about it at the time, but if you have faith and you persevere through it, to me, that's one of the, I'm very glad I went through that. Whereas prior to that, I'd say, boy, just keep me out of that kind of stuff. That's a mess.
I might mention at this point that if we're going to start taking questions pretty soon, if you'd like to ask a question, just go to my private chat and we'll look at those questions and bring them in. And then also just FYI, we are recording this, so at a later time, you can access it and share it with other people that you work with, maybe even your boss that needs to hear it. But I think this is great resource for many people. One of the things that is kind of difficult a lot of times is family dynamics. So how can you be a servant leader in a role like that within the family? And unfortunately, we don't have family members to rebut, but what are some things that you have learned really in business and dealing with that you've also been able to use with your family?
I think it is a little bit different at home because I'm not the leader at home. Marilyn's a leader, to be perfectly honest. But as you think about it, it's about the how, right? And so being a better listener, whether it's your wife, whether it's your family, your kids, and really trying to serve them, even during things that you might like to do a little differently or handle a little differently. And so the humility, the service mentality, the listening, and the accountability, right? I mean, you have to hold yourself accountable, you have to hold your family accountable. So a lot of the same principles apply, but it is a different dynamic, and there's some different emotions and that type of thing that obviously take place in a family environment. But it does help you. I think the mentality, it's much more balanced than maybe what you would experience otherwise.
Yeah, I told Dennis, this is a trick question. I thought we were just going to talk about business. So, but I think servant leadership is really applies everywhere. But I think sometimes it's even tougher with our spouses because we are there to serve them, and sometimes I don't think I do the best job of that. And but I think about our kids. Kids are really difficult because sometimes you're trying to serve and love them at the same time you're trying to guide them, and how you handle them, giving them enough of freedom that they don't hurt themselves, at the same time restricting it when we think they do. That I find that to be the hardest part. And but I do think it still gets back, as long as your kids or your employees or whatever know that you really care for them. That gives you the basis for to really influence them. I think John Maxwell said, the old quote was that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that model works at home just as well as it does at work.
Yeah. The other thing, when you think about servant leadership, you might question, well, does it apply in any type of company? And I think the answer is yes. But recently I've been involved with more private equity companies. And so private equity has got a pretty keen focus on kind of bottom line results. I think sometimes they may get a bad reputation for that. So it probably depends on the company you're with. But I found, even in serving on the board roles, it's really, I try to think about things as, how do I help make the management team successful, as opposed to directing and telling them what to do, and being a voice for them, and maybe providing some thoughts and guidance. And again, with the mentality that you're there to help them be successful. And I was a little worried about that as I started to come into that environment, not knowing it very well, coming from big companies. But that same servant leadership mentality applies anywhere, and it really does make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Bill, because there are times that I think take private equity. Just use that as a lot of it has to do is, what's your time frame? At Coke, our focus was long-term holding.
That's right.
So they're building structure and systems and teamwork, and all of that makes tons of sense. If suddenly it's a buy and flip, that's a very different model.
It is.
That lends itself more to the top down, probably. And so, that's the only thing I would say is, it's, there's wartime generals and there's peacetime generals, but I think some of the stuff that if you're in the buy and flip type mode, then servant leadership, even though I think it could be very successful, it probably doesn't have the time frame.
It's a different balance, right? Because of the priorities that you say, that you suggest and are very real. You're trying to flip a company in 3 to 5 years versus, but again, it's how you approach it, how you think about it, how you treat others, even in that situation.
I would like to remind the audience again to post some questions, and then when we're toward the end, I'll bring those up. So feel free to go ahead and ask questions that you may have. During this the COVID flu situation, what has been ways that, particularly Bill, I think in your situation, how have you dealt with that, and how has the servant leadership model helped?
You know, it's obviously been a unique time for all of us, right, in working through this. And so I was serving in an interim CEO role at the time. I'm no longer doing that as we went through COVID. But what I learned was you have to even show even more care for others and over communicate to others during this situation, because you no longer have the luxury of having face-to-face meetings in a lot of cases, being able to go out and visit the sites, visit the employees, those type of things. And, you know, I think our workplace is it's not going back to where it was. It'll be some more remote than it was, and maybe back to normal in some form or fashion, but it's going to be a different model than we're used to. And so I guess what I've learned through it, and honestly, I could have done better at it as I look back, is being more intentional about communicating, letting the people know you care about them, and supporting them as they're going through a lot of the challenges, because we really don't understand what everybody goes through during these times. And everyone's got different family situations and those type of things. And yet at the same time, you still have to keep the company viable. You have to make some very tough decisions depending on your situation. You know, in a lot of cases, smaller companies, they don't have the balance sheet to survive on some of these things. And so how you handle that and how you communicate that is extremely critical.
I redouble that. I remember when we went through the difficult situation Bill and I talked about with our midstream acquisition and then trying to figure out what to do with our trading businesses and all that. There was a guy that worked in our HR group at Coke, a guy named Walt Malone, that came to me, and he came up to help us as we were trying to build our Houston office. We just started the big Houston office in the late 90s. And he made a comment to me that he said, Kyle, when difficulties arise and businesses are going through stress, he said, most leaders under communicate by a factor of 10. It's not 10%, and so that's the most important thing that you can do as a leader is to stabilize that, is to over communicate with your people and all that, because there's a void. If you leave a void in their mind, they're going to fill it with the worst possible outcome. So it's really important to stabilize. And I've seen that at a company I work with, another midstream company, that where the leader has done a phenomenal job of, he's one of the best communicators I've seen in building a cohesive culture. And so that's the most important thing I think a servant leader can do in those tough times.
Yeah, agreed.
We have a question. We hear a lot about renewable energy. Realistically, how would you counsel a young person who is entering the oil and gas industry about their long-term career security in the oil patch?
In conventional oil?
I think
well,
that's
first of all, I'll take a shot at it here. I believe that even though a lot of the green people would like to think that oil is going to go away, it's not going to go away. Oil and gas will not go away as fast as people think it. It's still a vital function that's going to be performed. So number one, I'd say that oil and gas will be here for a lot longer than people think. I do think renewable clearly has got wind at its back. And so all I would just say is if somebody's in the oil and gas area, I think it's also good to learn to adapt and start figuring out ways to also utilize renewable energy in the most effective way. So I don't think it's just either or. I think it's going to be both and.
Yeah, I would add to that, part of a responsibility of a servant leader is to develop others, but that also includes developing yourself, thinking ahead. So it's always good to. It's a great question, but it's also you have some time to think about other things that you may be able to do or other areas you may be able to get into and what development needs you may have as a leader.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of displacement, not just because of, I think, renewable, but just the whole technology revolution going on. So we're all going to have to be lifetime learners and even maybe late in life learn new skills and all that. So that's going to be a key.
That's right.
Well, from a spiritual growth standpoint, what has been the most effective resources you've had to grow in your faith and in business?
Resources as in like people, books?
Oh, yeah. It could be books, studies, communities, whatever that you look back on that made the most difference in your spiritual growth.
Well, I think, Bill, I will have to say I learned a lot more through pain than I did through success. So number one, I hate to say that, but well, clearly the Bible has been a source of constant teaching to me and all that. So that's clearly one, Dennis. And the other, obviously I've read, other books and all that at the time, but I'd say mainly it's being surrounded by a community of, I've got men that I meet with. So I have a really strong posse that I'm with, that we carry each other through these difficult times. So I think that's absolutely important that you're a part of a team. I'm not talking about just at business, but I mean, have a posse, so to speak, of men or couples or whatever that really you can be totally transparent with and share going through these tough times or good times. So that's been the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, and honestly, you go through phases where I'm real good at that and then I'm not as good at it. And you can tell a big difference when you stay engaged with a group, whether it's a men's group or a couples group. And that just helps you in general. I would say that, if somebody's really interested I found a book, Lead Like Jesus, was a real good foundation as it relates to servant leadership. There's a lot of servant leadership books. I went through Greenleaf studies and things like that. But Lead Like Jesus is a great book, I think, just to kind of get the foundation of what it really means spiritually and how you lead. It's written by Ken Blanchard.
Blanchard's really good.
Yep.
John Maxwell's written a lot of good stuff too. I mean, there's some really good
There's
stuff.
a lot out there. There's a lot out there.
Go ahead. Excuse me.
No, I was just thinking there was a quote I was going to share with you, and I don't know if there's a good time to share it. But I was thinking about some of the wars that Bill and I have gone through together. But there was a great quote by Colin Powell. When he first came out of Desert Storm and all that, and he was kind of the man there for a while. And he put out there was somebody had interviewed him, and he had like these 10 principles he used for leadership. And one of them that has always stuck out to me, he says, if your people quit coming to you with your problems, you've lost them. And I think that is a terrific verse or terrific comment. So I would have to say that's also a key. And I think in a servant leader's role is that your people need to be able to come to you with an issue. The other thing I'm going to share is I was in a Bible study, a Sunday school class at First Baptist years ago, and Beth Moore was teaching, and she was teaching on the meaning of work. And I'll just share this with you. It was if you look in Genesis 2, where the word work is used for the first time, and mainly Adam working in the garden. The word work was a Hebrew word. I think it was called abad, A-B-A-D, and it meant three things. It meant to labor, so that's one aspect. The second part, though, was to serve or minister, and the third part was to worship. So as believers, I think the servant model, servant leadership fits right in there. But it's also, you can also be a minister in your role, and you can actually worship in a way that you perform at such a high level, and that God gets the glory for what you do. So those are the kind of things that have guided me more than anything else, is to try to, I don't always get all three done at the same time. Mostly it's labor, but every once in a while I get to serve and minister, and occasionally I get to worship, but that's kind of the ultimate.
We had another business question. Do you think the recent consolidation in the traditional oil and gas business is over for a while, or will there be more?
I think there's more. I think it's just starting.
Oh, wow.
I believe we're way too, whether it's oil field service, midstream, I just think that there'll be more to come.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably more in certain areas than others. And I think oil field service has really seen it significantly. Midstream is starting to see aspects of it. Refining, you're going to see, I think there's just going to be a lot more consolidation.
Yeah.
That's my guess. It's probably not what you wanted to hear, but I think that's the answer.
Yeah.
Bill, is that your perspective too?
Yeah, I'm not as close to the gas and oil as Kyle is, but I think it certainly makes common sense, kind of given the situation.
From the standpoint of next steps in your own lives, what do you think you'll be doing in 5 years?
Wasn't on the list of questions.
Caught us cold, then.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I hope I'm here.
Well, unless the rapture happens.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but the way things are going, come sweet Jesus. It's interesting. I do have an answer for that. This last year, I did a lot of, kind of went through a dry spiritual time. So I was really spending a lot of time reading through a book over and over called Waiting on God by Andrew Murray, who's a terrific writer. So he wrote back in the late 1800s. And after kind of going through this over a long period of time, I kind of got a message that to me, he gave me I got three things out of it. I want to surrender, I want to simplify my life, and serve. And those are the three. And so I'm at a stage now where I'm kind of getting old enough that it won't be much longer. I won't be on a lot of boards and all that. And that's going to be difficult because I've spent 50 years being a part of a team. So, but I'll just end up on a different team. I'll do more in the area of ministry and all that. So I would say for me, while I want to stay close to business because I love it, I'll probably do more into working with churches and missions and things like that. That's probably where I'll be.
Mine's similar. It brings to mind, Kyle, I don't know if you remember this, of just having a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
That we used to work on together in terms of what you're going to do personally, professionally, spiritually. And, as I think about it, it's similar. I still stay pretty active right now from a business perspective. And it's a little bit different being in private equity, the amount of hands-on that you have when you serve on a board.
Yeah, you get a lot of help.
Yeah, you get a lot of help, especially when things aren't going right. But I think over time, it's to maybe not take, over the next 5 years, take that a notch back. Probably not ready to quit it, but to serve more. I currently am on the board of a food bank, which I enjoy, where you're really helping out others, and really try to do more things with Maryland. I think sometimes we forget our spouses. We get so busy with things, and you sometimes forget that all the support they provide us and how they make us successful. And I need to do a better job of that and do some things together with her in terms of serving others, as well as better serving her. And then obviously you have the family.
Amen to that.
One question on since you're both on boards, how does the servant leadership model work when you're just a member of a board and not the leader of the board?
Good question.
No, I think we've all dealt with a lot of different board members. And there's some that may like to dictate what should happen and how to do things. And, they could be right. Oftentimes, maybe they are right. But again, I think it's the how you do things and how you constructively help people. Obviously, there's times when you have to point out certain situations, deal with difficult situations. And to me, it's really about the how you do that.
Yeah.
And you can come across as very helpful, or you can come across as and constructive, while still being very frank, as opposed to maybe tearing people down and being critical.
Mm.
And so to me, it's the servant leadership model applies in how you approach things. And bottom line is you still got to hold the group accountable, but the approach you take, the humility you show, the care that you show for those folks, for the management team is important.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. I've been on several boards, and fortunately, most of them have been led by servant leader models. So that made it easy. I'm on another one where there is some private equity, and it's much more it's a different model. I'll put it that way. But there's still great opportunities, I think, for not only in how you deal with management, but also even with your other board members of really being there to serve. And so I think I don't change my stripes just because I'm in a different role, but I just have to be who I was designed to be. But I feel like it still works. In fact, it must have some bearing because I'm still on the boards. I guess they'd get rid of me if they didn't like me.
You can still accomplish what the objectives by applying that model.
What I've learned in this, even as a board, I've been on these boards for quite a while, but I've gotten to know what I really love to do is talk to the leaders of the company. And
that's right.
Get to know them as people. And I feel like I can have really honest discussions. They'll tell me, it's back to the Colin Powell thing. I think they'll actually share with me things they might not even share with somebody else. So not that I'm trying to get in between management and the board, but I try to really build a relationship because I understand what, difficult situations you're in and what they're going through. So I still really, to me, I enjoy as much as anything, the relationships.
I agree.
What has been the difference between being on the board of a nonprofit versus a for-profit?
Profit's a lot easier because you know what you're there for. But I've been on several. There's two in particular I'm on now, but I really feel like profit is a way, at least profit is a measure that's easy to see. At the end of the month, how you did. It's not as easy, to measure success in a nonprofit, but I do think the same principles apply. It's just sometimes you have to make sure that the organization, the people and all that kind of think a little bit more, let's just say, at least have some business principles involved. It's not all about business, but they at least have to have effective ways of accomplishing the mission, whether it's evangelism or generosity or whatever, or what you do, Dennis. It's also important to also have good metrics, So I think that's the main thing, is trying to figure out what are the right metrics that help the organization be successful. It's a little more challenging, I think, in a nonprofit.
Right.
I would agree, Kyle. I think it's you have to have, or I know I do. You have to have even more patience because you're used to dealing with metrics and measures, and it may not come naturally depending on the organization that you're working with. So sometimes it's hard to understand the progress actually being made, and it is a balance. It's not. It's there's still businesses, and that they've got to run, but it's it's just a different mindset. So it's been good for me because it actually makes you take a step back and be a little more patient and listen even more, and then try to be very careful about how you may suggest changing things going forward, or trying to drive that improvement.
Yeah, there's an old saying is you manage what you measure, and so if you don't measure anything, you don't manage anything. So
That's right.
Bill used the word accountability. That's one of the things that we try. What I've been involved with is helping make sure that we have accountability, know who's responsible for what kind of measures. You got to put those kind of things in place. A lot of times people that have gone into ministry either never have been trained that way or they don't want it. You still got to be accountable. You're going to be accountable to Jesus. So, you know, he likes the parable of talents. You know, he seemed to like performance. So, you know, sometimes you got to get into those kind of things that
You do.
they're not fun, but you know, you have to deal with that.
That's right.
Had another question here. We're kind of getting close to the end. What role or how much do you think the ESG emphasis is going to affect the energy business? And kind of along with that, Warren Buffett obviously invested quite a bit into Oxy and maybe some other energy companies as well. So he must be seeing something. But what do you see as what does that all indicate?
Well, I think ESG is going to be significant. At first, it was probably window dressing, but now, I mean, it's ultimately at a point where our country has turned so much towards, if you want to call it, renewables and a lot of the other aspects, diversity, blah, 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 whatever, all the things that are involved. It's, you know, environmental, social, and governance is what ESG stands for. So I think it's getting ready to be even a more significant part. I think at first some companies just kind of wanted to say, well, we've got a, you know, we support this and we've got a environmental health and safety group and blah, 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 but it's a lot more than that, because now capital is being earmarked to, okay, you've got to hit certain things. So I do think the oil and gas industry using our that's where I grew up, we're gonna have to really adapt to that. And so I'm not saying it's all positive, but it's going to be, I think, a more significant effect.
It is a reality. I mean, even on the private equity side, even smaller firms, it's a big deal, right? So folks are looking very closely at that, whereas in the past that was, you know, just not a priority. But it's very intentional at this point.
Yeah, you're even starting to see more and more companies, even though very few of them do it now, maybe 15% have what I might call ESG type committees. I think you're getting ready to see every company have an ESG committee. You'll have, you know, governance, and you'll have, you know, audit and compensation, but I think ESG is getting ready to be a significant part, especially board life and corporate life. So it's just starting.
Yep. Kyle and Bill, we appreciate you sharing your war stories and your perspectives on all these things. Well, this has been great input. So thank you again so much for being a part of this.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.